Hello again, this is Charlie Bellefontaine, and you're listening to the HomeBuyer's Hour on WCPT AM 820, where the facts matter. And today we're going to be talking about educating buyers and sellers. An attorney, we'll just leave it as a generic term, in our studio with us today. So she wears two different hats, and not at the same time, because that's against the laws here in the state. But Alisa, I would love to hear about you, the name of your company, how people get a hold of you, and what you find interesting in the real estate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I am a broker. I'm the owner of Urban Homes LLC here in Chicago. And I'm also an attorney and owner of Levin Law Limited, where I practice law as a real estate attorney, doing various things from evictions and litigation, landlord-tenant, and also commercial cases and appeals and construction law and things like that. So I wear the two hats depending on who's in front of me and who's calling and needing my help.
It's like 12 hats.
It is like 12
It's a lot. And I'm a single mom, so always on the move.
That'll keep you busy for sure.
Absolutely.
And you heard Patrick chime in there a little bit. Patrick, give us your contact info, please.
I mean, I feel like I'm kind of a failure. I mean,
Failure.
I do. I wear one hat, so I don't have any kids. I don't, I just do real estate closings, real estate transactions. So if you're buying or selling a home, you want to get me involved to keep things smooth. Find my law firm, Loftus Law. Find me on social media, on TikTok. I don't know. By the time this airs, it might not be legal anymore, but find me there, Loftus Law, or find me on Instagram, which I don't think is under any legal peril, Loftus_law.
It is going to be interesting to see what happens with TikTok and stuff like that. So,
With the TikTok.
So, but I like this conversation. I mean, I like the subject is where I was going. And, as the home inspector of the transaction, we have such a small window that we're involved with the client on. You guys are, and especially you, Alisa, because you're wearing two hats, even though they're different times. I get that. But you guys are involved in the transaction for a longer period of time. And I find that most of the time when things go bad, it's usually due to lack of communication. Is that a fair statement, or do you think that I'm just being too, it's my fault and nobody else's?
It's definitely your fault and nobody else's. I wouldn't say personally from a brokerage perspective that it's a lack of communication, because at least in my experience, brokers and their clients are constantly communicating. It might be a lack of understanding, but there isn't usually a lack of effort in trying to communicate what's going on, because buyers approach a transaction from a more anxious perspective, and the broker's trying to settle them down and educate them along the way. And the real estate lawyer steps in at some point in that continuum to also provide guidance. So there isn't really a lack of communication, but whether or not the buyer can understand what the outcome can be, should be, or does not need to be, that may remain to be seen depending on the transaction itself.
I like that. And in my point of view with the communication part is we have a sender, we have a receiver, we have a message, and sometimes the person doesn't always hear what the sender has said. And that's what I meant about the communication parts. I'm trying to educate my client, I'm trying to give them some information, but they heard me like it was me talking to my teenage children.
Well, let me offer a slightly different perspective, and that is, I don't think necessarily the client and the real estate broker have a lack of communication for the most part. I find that line of communication is fairly wide open. Where I do find often the communication breakdowns occur is amongst the team assembled. Okay, so whether you're on the buyer side or the seller side, I can't tell you how many times I'll get a letter from a lawyer on another side of a transaction where it's kind of out of left field in some ways, and I would say more often than not, you can kind of boil it down to an attorney who's communicating with their client, but then they don't take the next step to communicate with the real estate broker as well, because I don't think many attorneys really take into consideration the fact that by the time you're involved, a lot has happened in the transaction.
Right.
You've had an entire negotiation. That contract didn't just appear out of thin air. there are things, and there are definitely going to be things not in the contract that are pertinent to the ongoing negotiations, because that contract is the first step toward having a full agreement, because you've got the attorney review, you've got the inspection. There's parts of the inspection that may have been negotiated already. If it was already taken into consideration that the roof is 15 years old, you don't want to then go to the client and say, hey, I see in the inspection report that the roof's 15 years old, we should ask for something on the roof, when that's already been negotiated. The client is relying on you, is relying on everyone in the transaction to guide them in a way that makes sense. If I've not had that, if I say to the client, hey, we should ask for $15,000 for the roof, and I'm using these as easy examples. The client, by and large, is going to go, yeah, love that idea.
Me too.
The lawyer's telling me I can ask for $15,000. 90% of the clients are going to be like, cool, you bet.
They're going to jump on top of it because they say to themselves, wow, I have an attorney who's willing to fight for me to improve the deal. And how quickly the buyer forgets that they already had that discussion with the broker of why the property was priced as it was.
Yeah.
Well, this is where I'm coming from. This is where it's like, what has changed? Why isn't the buyer, saying, okay, we've already negotiated for this, so we can't do this again, where it comes in there? Why don't we get these expectations and the process and everything else somehow in front of the buyer right away, or are they ignored?
Well, I mean, you can set expectations, but you don't want to feed them so much information that they're just overwhelmed, right?
Okay.
You're there to provide guidance, right?
You have to spoon feed that guidance in a way that is appropriate. So,
okay.
And I do that as a broker and as an attorney. Is you definitely can't overwhelm the client with too much information, because they don't know how to decipher what is more important from the left to the right. So they have to be advised in a certain pace of the transaction as to what decision has to be made at what time. So I think that what the missing piece is that the lawyer doesn't approach the broker typically at any point and say, well, how did we get here? They just receive a contract by email and they assume that the negotiation was done based upon some level of information, and then they take it there and they don't ask any further questions.
Yeah, I think there's, to me, and maybe I'm just speaking from my own.
That would be a
personal
huge mistake, is all I'm hearing.
Well, I
It's
feel
so common as to be,
Sorry.
it might be a mistake, but it's the lawyer doesn't talk to the buyer's broker. The lawyer typically would only, for the seller, the lawyer would only talk to their own broker, if any other broker at all.
I feel like there's a level of arrogance within the lawyer community, as far as we have the most education amongst all of the people involved, and we have the most the credential is the most difficult to get, and we forget that we're only one piece of the puzzle, right? And also, don't forget, in most places, there's not a lawyer involved. Like, this process is proven to be able to happen without us.
In most of the states.
We add a lot of value. There's a reason we're still involved here in the Chicago area in particular, and I think we add a lot of value. But part of the adding of value is being part of that team, not just being I'm the lawyer and I get to I got it from here. Like, that's a mistake in my opinion.
I would agree. To explain to clients why they need a lawyer, what you're doing, or why a broker should be involved. And as the laws and standards change from the industry, you have to be justifying your worth and the information and the assistance you can provide in the transaction.
Yeah, the more I do this, the more it's so important, especially if after the conversation with the client, we're gonna potentially ask for something from one side or the other that may get the broker called from the other broker, and I don't want them to find out about that thing from that phone call, because they're going to be caught on the back foot, and they're not going to be as prepared as they could be. Rather, I would like to make sure that, hey, I'm going to send this letter out. We're going to ask for probably a little bit more than you were expecting to ask. Is there any reason why I need to maybe pull back on that?
That's a good question.
But I think It depends, like you said, Charles, on the communication between the lawyer and the broker. So when I'm acting in a brokerage capacity, I'm not acting as an attorney. However, the attorney that I'm working with usually brings me into a conversation when we're looking at an inspection report so that it opens up an opportunity to say, well, how did we get here? And at that point, I typically would say, well, we arrived at this offer price based upon these conditions that were apparent when we toured the property, and then that's justified by what was confirmed later by the inspector. When I'm the broker in the transaction, I'm trying my best to prepare my client for what they should expect, and those discussions take place. But I can't say that every other broker does that.
Right, and I guess, since we're talking about what I call a mass fury of things happening, which is, that 5-day window or 5 business day window right after the contract is signed. And that's the part that I'm involved with. And the biggest thing, when we started doing these Zoom interviews with our clients, a lot of people don't understand the roles. A lot of people, a lot of my clients that I'm talking to, they don't understand what are the roles of the different people involved. And for example, I do a home inspection. All right. What does my client need to know in order to make a good decision? They're going to need to know what the problem is, how severe the problem is, how soon do I have to react to it. They're really going to need to know how much is it going to cost if it has to be fixed, and then they're also going to want to know, is it, can I negotiate for this?
But only half of those questions, or some of those questions, you can answer.
Well, that's my point. And I can answer every single one of those except, how
Can it
much
be
leverage,
negotiated?
yeah, how much leverage do I have? And that's where I don't believe the attorney can do that either. This is where I believe that the power of the real estate broker, especially when it's good, they're going to know the CMAs, the comparative market analysis. They're going to know how hot that small market is. They're going to know how many other buyers there are. They're going to know where it's priced compared to it and basically how much leverage the client has. And if we go ahead and talk to our clients, with that, and I do when I talk to them, I keep my nose out of the negotiation because I don't know how much leverage they have. So I have no help in that, and it would be just bad advice. But everything else I could do, the severity, how to fix it, what it's going to cost, all that stuff I could do. And this is where I'm, I don't understand why my clients don't understand that ahead of time.
Because they're working with many brokers that don't have the requisite experience to identify what's wrong with a property. If all they're doing is opening the door and providing a contract form that they themselves don't understand, then they're not empowering themselves to educate their buyer. They're not identifying what questions the buyer needs to have answered before the question is even asked. So a sophisticated broker, a highly experienced broker who knows a lot about real estate and construction, is going to be more helpful in guiding a buyer towards consummating a transaction than a broker who is newly licensed, who doesn't know the difference between, a condo and an apartment and a building and a row house and things like that. The broker has to know their product, and only an experienced broker truly understands those differences. And similarly, an experienced real estate attorney can provide that type of guidance based upon their experience as well.
Okay, so this is what I got for both of you that I want, because you're both experienced, you're both knowledgeable, and you're both passionate. So what do you, and I'm just going to call it onboarding. All right, so when you onboard a new buyer or a new client who's with a contract already signed, Patrick, what is that onboarding process like? What are the, I'm hoping that we have some things that are structured. Hey, you need to know this. You need to know this. We got to get through this.
Well, let me jump into that because even though I'm a real estate attorney and I do practice in that area, if we're talking about onboarding a client as a buyer or as a seller, it's my job to have a discussion with them, whether that takes place in person or via text or online over the phone. That doesn't matter. But it's my job to know what they do know, to find out what they know, and to identify the gaps in what they don't know, so that I can get them to the right property, the right set of circumstances for a mortgage, for the location, for the school, for everything that meets their needs in relation to the property. And I have to be sure they can buy the property. So I have to educate myself on their lending capability, everything that they need to do to be able to close it. I have to ask personal questions like money in the bank, contemplated transactions. Are you going to try to buy a car while you're trying to get a mortgage at the same time?
Absolutely.
So do you have any problems at your job where you're going to get fired right before closing? So I have to work a lot of requests for information into a relationship that I've presumably just started with that client. I've got to convince them to sign a contract with me, and then I've got to take them to show properties. And oftentimes that's all, taking place in one day.
I've seen both of those things happen just this year.
Right. So the broker is in a very unique position to obtain a lot of information from a prospective purchaser.
But it's all important, isn't it?
Well, it's vital because if I represent somebody who has no capacity to get a mortgage because their credit score is in the 400s because they've never had a credit card, I am in a unique position to be able to teach them how to reach the goal, presumably how long it will take, which 6 months to a year and a half to establish that credit history, and to keep them excited about the industry and not to give up because they're not ready. But I'm the first line of defense in determining whether a buyer is ready or not ready. The lawyer doesn't get the contract until the broker is emailing it to them. So the lawyer receives the contract, reviews it, determines when the inspection is going to take place, and then the lawyer takes over. The only thing a lawyer can do is say, is there anything unique about this that, I need to know? But that depends on the relationship between the attorney and the broker.
Yeah, we don't really do a ton of vetting.
Right.
It's really not necessary. I would say when I start to see things, if it's a condo, for example, and I see a FHA financing, I want to know if there's a rental restriction right off the bat.
Or even if the condo's FHA approved.
Well,
a lot of buildings aren't.
But the mortgage broker can typically deal with that hurdle. The lawyer doesn't have to do that much.
But then it's too late.
With an FHA loan, if there's a total rental restriction, a complete
cap.
Yeah, not cap. Cap is okay, but if there are no rentals allowed at all, you can't get an FHA loan. Period. You're done. So I want to know that before my client pays for an inspection and goes down that road, and then we get the condo docs and it's like, oh yeah, complete rental restriction, and you go, no rentals allowed, and you go. That was a bunch of work that no one needed to do.
And those don't come overnight, those condo docs. Am I wrong in that statement?
Usually not.
Primarily, they have to be requested from management. The fee has to be paid, and then they're delivered to the attorney. So the broker doesn't have those documents, and it would be highly unusual for the realtor to have the condo documents.
And I guess this is my beef with most real estate brokers is that, and go, well, I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm only going to know real estate. And I'm like, that's not really helpful to your clients, because quite frankly, I see the real estate broker as the hub in the transaction. They're the first person who meets the client. They're the first person who builds a relationship with the client. And that relationship is built out of trust.
Absolutely.
They should need to know what everybody else is going to be doing or have a pretty damn good idea what's going to happen during the home inspection process, the condo docs, and the more times you could avoid somebody from going down that roller coaster ride, I mean, there's, I get these calls, oh, you killed my deal. It never should have been there in the first place.
Right.
You should know that your client did not want to buy a house that has an old roof. They didn't want to buy a house that has an old furnace.
But you overestimate the buyer's excitement at what they perceive as to be an attractive purchase price. That carries so much weight that the other people in the transaction ultimately have to peel those layers back like an onion to disentangle the buyer from their excitement on what they perceive to be a good deal. And that takes a lot of paperwork and a lot of time. So the buyer sees a 2-flat for $350,000 in a highly desirable area with an attic or a basement that can be turned into an additional rental property under the radar of the city of Chicago. That's a great deal. We should move forward. They don't care if the foundation is wonky, if the roof is old, if it doesn't have air conditioning, and if the electricity needs to be upgraded. They all want to deal with that later. It isn't until they see the inspection report that they're like, oh yeah, that's a lot.
Boy, most of my clients are like, they'll see that inspection report and they're like, oh yeah, that turns out no, it's a no for me, dog. And it's like, okay.
Just because of looking at that. And I got to confess that most reports, including ours, all right, here's the problem, here's what I think of the problem, and that's really about it. Have a nice day. and then I just throw it in the lap of the seller.
But part
That
of it is
doesn't
that
help them.
you leave out in the report all the good things about the house, right? The
That's
report.
not my job, is the good things.
Understood, but
Sorry.
the value proposition when you're reading an inspection report seems to highlight only the things that are wrong, and because they don't say, well, this works, this works, this works in the way that the buyer perceives is readily apparent to them, and they have to look for the good things, they're easily scared off by the inspection reports.
Yeah, I guess I could see that pretty easily. It's just that, on the other side, I remember when I went to help a friend of mine who bought a house down in Florida, and I'm not licensed in Florida, so we had to hire a home inspector down there, and I was appalled by this one inspector that did the inspection for her, and I also did my routine and with our equipment and everything else, but he didn't take off the electrical panel, didn't even know there was a furnace in the attic, or I should say an electrical furnace in the attic. What do you mean we don't have heat in here? And it was
he didn't even look?
No, he didn't look. It was an 80-page report with 3 defects in it. And to
Most
me,
of it form or boilerplate language?
No, it was pictures of this wall, that wall, that wall, the floor, the ceiling. He documented the building and took pictures of everything. And in this case, it actually was beneficial because we had the entire building documented right before Ian came through. And she ended up stepping away from that because it did flood. It was part of that in the coastal waterways and stuff like this. So it did flood. But I guess the point is it's just as bad for the client if I bury the problems inside of a whole bunch of good stuff. It should be easy to find what's expensive, what's middle of the road, and what's kind of maintenance.
Yeah, no, and I wasn't suggesting that the good stuff should bury the bad stuff. It's just that it usually is a report that's very scary to buyers. And the broker that they're working with, as well as the real estate attorney, oftentimes have to go through and assist them in summarizing what are actual items that are a right now issue that need to be discussed with inside the transaction, and things that can be, deferred maintenance items for later. A buyer is typically not in the position to make those determinations. So I sit in a unique position because I'm both an attorney and a broker, and I have construction experience, so I can talk to the broker about those. Talk to my client about those things. But ultimately, the buyer has to sit with themselves and make a decision of whether moving forward is something that they want to do. So Patrick's clients what he's saying, they bail a little bit more quickly. It seems to me mine bail a little more slowly, only after they've received additional information. But the bottom line is that if the seller's not disclosing defects that are readily apparent in an inspector and to a seasoned broker, then the onus falls on the seller to not have done that, not have filled out inspection documents or disclosure documents that aren't precisely truthful. And it begs
Which ones are?
Well,
I mean, honestly,
the inspection or the disclosures, I think they ask the wrong questions.
Maybe, but it seems like Sergeant Schultz on Hogan's Heroes has filled out every single one of these. I know nothing.
Right. I didn't live there. I don't know anything. I was in a property recently where, the kitchen floor was a completely different and off-putting color to the rest of the property. And I asked the broker, I said, when was this remodeled? Was there ever a flood? Oh, no, everything's fine. And we did a sewer scope, and it showed that there was rocks inside the plumbing directly under the kitchen. So presumably it did flood. It didn't match, and it was obvious that something was going on, but the seller didn't disclose it because they don't want to turn off a buyer. But that's a value judgment they're making at the time they do the paperwork, rather than at the time they lose a buyer in hand who's walking away.
I might need a little education here. If a seller knows of a problem and they fixed a problem, or even if they just think they fixed a problem, even if it wasn't done right, but they think they did, do they have to disclose that?
I think it depends on the actual I'd say definition of what the existence of a problem is. I always recommend disclosing past problems that were repaired to be better safe than sorry. But I agree with what I think Patrick was going to say, is that if you believe you don't have a current problem, there is no current duty of disclosing the lack of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie, think about it this way. Let's say that your roof is leaky and you replace the roof or you patch it. And you're not experiencing any more leaks. Let's say you just patched it. Replacing is maybe the wrong example. And there's no leak. And so what is there to disclose at that point? What is it that you would, and what fix would you employ to solve that problem that you believe you've solved? So
The question is there a current roof leak? No.
So
Right.
you know, and that's what makes these kinds of things so difficult from a buyer's perspective. It's not simply the ability to prove that something's wrong. You have to prove that the seller knew
knowledge.
about the thing that was wrong, or should have known, or omitted pertinent information that would have led you to discover something. So
And there's not really lawsuits from disclosure violations, is there?
Oh, very
there
much
are
so.
plenty,
Yeah.
Really?
but not nearly as many as could be filed, right?
Right.
Like, if
Interesting.
the number of lawsuits that could be filed as compared to the number of lawsuits that actually are filed, it's a small percentage, because lots and lots of times things happen, and someone's at fault and they ought to pay. But if it doesn't make economic sense to file that lawsuit, i.e., if it's going to cost you $75,000 in attorney's fees to fully adjudicate that $10,000 claim, guess what? If there's no fee shifting provision in a contract or in a statute, lawsuit's not getting filed. And there's lots and lots, especially in real estate. How many problems arise to the level of this makes more sense to file this lawsuit and pay the lawyer? Yes, in the context of a violation of the Real Property Disclosure Act, you may be able to have the fees shifted, but that's a may. It's
You'd
not
have
a
to prove
shall.
fraud, which would have to prove specific intent and knowledge.
And
And that's hard
and
to
that's
do.
the point
Right.
that I was
Nobody
going after.
admits,
Right.
I frauded you. It
Earnest
never
money
happens.
disputes are more common, where the buyer needs their money back to move on to the next transaction. The seller's holding it. So that's more common. But I think, again, the problem with disclosure is that sometimes the disclosure form isn't asking the right questions. Typically, or at least in my experience, the real estate attorney goes beyond that disclosure to say, were there problems in the past? Were there insurance claims? Was there any evidence of water incursion or, wind damage or anything like that? And that the gain is to bring about the information for the benefit of the buyer so they can determine if something did happen in the past.
Usually the real estate broker is more concerned about the disclosures than the client, just because they kind of have more skin in the game. If someone can identify, it's one thing to sue the seller, right? And if the seller ain't got nothing, that's another reason you don't sue somebody, is if they ain't got nothing. But if you can rope the broker in, they've got E&O insurance, and now you have possibly a place to recover from as a plaintiff. So
Well, we all know that E&O insurance is not there for the clients. That's there for me.
Right.
All right. And that's
Right.
there for the real estate broker.
Which
And all
is-
that is, and I do want to get this clear for our listeners, errors and omissions is what he means by E&O. Errors and omissions is nothing more. I mean, granted, it's a technical insurance policy, but really you're putting an attorney firm on retainer to protect you in case you get sued because you made an error or you omitted something, and you have to pay out, and then they'll pay out. But they're going to defend you for that stuff, and most likely their pockets are.
nobody wants to get sued, period.
Nobody
Right.
does.
Okay.
I don't either.
So from the example of certainly for a real estate broker, they've got a lot to lose. Yes, you're right. Insurance, you buy insurance to mitigate a risk. What's the risk? The risk is something happens and I get sued over it because I'm out there, and even if you do everything perfect and right, it doesn't mean that someone's not going to feel some kind of way about something you may or may not have
Absolutely.
done.
Angry
or,
people do angry things.
they evaluate it in some kind of way, or they see an angle, right? So that's all fine and dandy. But if you, as the real estate broker, get sued, your managing broker is going to be furious. They're not going to care whether or not, hey, I did everything I was supposed to do. They're going to be mad at you. Okay.
But they're also not going to do anything to help in most circumstances.
Well, and so they're going to be
I
mad.
love slamming the managing
They're not going to be that useful for you. They're also going to be a problem for you. So it creates a lot of ancillary problems. It's not just the matter of, darn it, I got sued. Better tender the claim to my insurance, and they'll deal with it. All right. Even if your managing broker is supportive, let's say that you got lucky, or you picked a managing broker that is an ally in some way, you still have to work with that lawyer. You've got to answer discovery. You're gonna have to sit for a deposition, and the other lawyer is going. If you've never sat for a deposition as the deponent,
They are very intimidating.
Sucks. It is bad, and like imagine you're on the stand in Law and Order, right? It's sort of like that.
Were you lying then, or are you lying now?
Right. I mean, but it's like it's real. It's you, and this person is going to, in 18 different roundabout ways, accuse you of being horrible, and you're not gonna like it. No one likes that.
Well, not only that, but if you're not the person who filled out the form, I mean, the only way the broker could have liability for a disclosure form is if they themselves filled it out or coached the seller in how to fill it out.
That happens all the time.
Sure.
The coaching part.
Not by me, but yeah, I understand.
So these things they can get really messy. But yeah, to go back to my original point, the client themselves, they'll look at it and they might want your coaching, and you might go, hey, read the thing, answer the questions, and that's usually my advice. I go,
agreed.
Look, read it very carefully and answer yes or no to the question that's asked. I don't want you to think too hard about it. These are yes or no questions, and read the question, answer yes or no. If any of it's yes, that's okay.
Right, and then you just put the additional information in an addendum.
Honestly, and you said something earlier that I think is really important, and that is, if something happened in the past and it was repaired and you've never had a problem, I think that there is a strategic advantage to disclosing that.
I do too.
Because you gain some credibility with the other side. The thing that makes
honesty is a big deal.
The thing that makes a transaction go more smoothly is trust
And honor.
Trust,
absolutely.
Boom.
Trust is transaction lubricant, right? I think I can say that. Just like oil in an engine. Okay, there we go. I just
He brought it full circle.
Just made it G-rated.
I'm looking for Devin.
So what are some ways to build trust? That's one way to do it. I mean, it's difficult because there are diametrically opposed motivations there.
A buyer could say, well, why is he telling me this? What else is he hiding? Well, if he's telling me this, and maybe he's lying about something else.
I get that a lot of my post interviews as well. I don't believe that the seller is being honest and upfront with us. My clients are literally telling me that.
Right.
And people will go down that rabbit hole, I think, more readily if something's discovered where it's like, man, this seller definitely knew about that. And they go, what else? That's where the what else are they? And then they'll take it to the extreme because that's the impulse, that's the instinct. They're trying to protect themselves from a potential big problem. And that's where, being upfront about things. I mean, surprises are what kill deals, right?
Yes.
You get the condo docs 3 weeks into the transaction, and they reveal that there's no reserves, and that there's a special assessment coming down the pipe.
Why don't we get this in the beginning? That's my point. Why do we have to go down this damn whole roller coaster ride? Why don't we just fix it in the beginning?
That's the way we do it.
Right.
I don't like it.
I don't either.
There's a simple reason, though, is that the larger management companies wish to procure a fee for having to produce over and over again the same documents. So they charge the seller in a sales transaction to give the declarations and bylaws, which presumably the seller already has because he got a copy of them at the time he purchased the property. There's only a couple of sheets of paper that a management company or an condo association board has to specially produce for the transaction, which is a 5-minute task, but condo associations like to charge the seller for doing that job.
About $500.
Yeah.
Which is funny because...
Want to make that money over and over again every time a condo is sold.
Yeah, it makes me barf.
I hate it too.
What we're talking about here is, there's a set of documents that, that you're entitled to as a buyer, that the seller's supposed to procure from the condo board or property manager, whoever it is. The majority of those documents, the seller as an owner in the condominium is entitled to get as a matter of right.
And should already have.
Well,
the budget, the declarations are things that they would have or they can get for free and easily deliver.
Most of our society doesn't care.
Right. And they didn't read them anyway.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you should be able to contact the property manager or board and be able to get all of that stuff that you're just describing. However, there is the 22.1 disclosure, which is one of the documents that Alisa is talking about that needs to be completed at that time, because it tells you things that are pertinent in that moment. How
It's
much?
about 3 minutes to fill it out, if that.
How
It's
much
very
earned
straightforward.
reserves? Are there any upcoming projects in the next two, in the current or the following 2 years? You know, are there any special
Litigation.
assessments?
I think that's important stuff.
And so there's another one, litigation. Litigation, if it's not being, if there's no insurance coverage for it, and that litigation is pending, that can also torpedo a loan by itself.
Absolutely.
So. Yeah,
Or City of Chicago code violations, things that maybe aren't big cases, but things that can be worrisome for a lender.
Sure, you know,
Those
what we're
are
talking about
the
is
City of
deferred
Chicago,
maintenance,
yeah.
these kinds of things. As a seller, honestly, so you know, sellers, I think the impulse is, hey, let the buyer do their due diligence. Why should I offer anything extra?
Right. I agree with that.
And I think that makes sense if you don't think too hard about it.
Right.
As a
hate it.
seller, by and large, the thing that you can never get back, and that none of us can ever get back, is time. Right? So if you are just hoping for the best for 3 weeks, that they're not going to discover this, that, or the other thing, and bam, they got it. Shoot, you've just lost 3 weeks. What did that cost you? It cost you some money, no doubt. Okay, because it will be at least another 4 to 6 weeks from the next contract that you accept, assuming it is of equal
higher,
purchase price. You know, all of that, right? Probably not going to be higher, you know, in most circumstances. Why?
Because the incoming buyer sees the failed transaction and makes the assumption that something failed in the transaction as a result of the inspection.
When we're
Completed my
dealing with
sentence.
this kind of money, all right, and buying a house is not cheap. It's not the, you know, what do you call that section when you're at the checkout word, impulse section.
Right.
It's not an impulse buy.
It is, but it is conducted with more impulsivity than
Which
you would
is my
expect.
beef.
Right.
That's my problem right there. Why are we not getting ahead of these things? You go out to the West Coast, for example, they do pre-listing inspections. Here it's taboo. Oh, no, I don't want to know anything because I don't want to be sued.
But those are typically municipal requirements. So, like,
No, they're not. That is
in
not
many-
true.
in many places
we're
they are.
referring to two different things here. He's talking about, you know, the way things are done.
you mean with the brokers do a pre-listing inspection?
Correct.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Like the custom that has developed in certain. I mean, we know that real estate is hyper local, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
even between the city and the suburbs, I can identify certain customs that differ.
Of course.
And so, you know, in California, obviously they do things, you know, in quite a different manner. What Alisa is referring to are the point of sale inspection requirements that many municipalities have.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
and that is done by the municipal and stuff like that. But even that's limited. And
Sometimes.
and most of
Right.
them, sometimes? Okay, I'm curious on that one.
call Flossmore.
And then other ones
I
are,
Berwyn that closed last
Yeah.
week.
you know, they require all that stuff to be fixed that they find in there too. Some are like that.
Well, okay, so when you're talking about a pre-listing inspection, you mean that an inspection is conducted between the listing broker and the home seller?
The listing broker and the home seller, I don't know if that's right, but let's just say that
Who's inspecting?
They would hire a guy like Charlie.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
The
you know,
seller would.
The
Sure,
seller
so
would. We
you-
come out there. And we've done this before, but it's not popular. And I just don't understand why. Why wouldn't you want to get ahead of these problems? Why would you want to be ignorant and letting these things go by there? And that is
Because ignorance is bliss.
Ignorant is not bliss, and you know better than that.
'Cause,
All
look,
right.
Because the seller doesn't want to do anything to spend money if they think that it will ultimately lose them more money in the long run. The less the seller knows, the happier they are. And they are relying on the ignorance and impatience of the buyer.
But see, that's a society thing.
Of-
Because
well,
again, I'm going
absolutely.
back. I'm going back to California, Washington State, you know, out on the West Coast, because that is not how real estate is viewed out there.
I would agree, but I also think that the pre-listing inspection concept that you've mentioned is a fantastic idea. But that would require sellers in high volume marketplaces, Chicago being one of them, for putting the onus on them to spend the money, to take the time, to have the inspection, and then be willing to do something about it. Chicago's just not bred that way.
I mean,
Fair enough.
I think Charlie.
No, fair enough. I could agree with that.
The answer to your question, I think, is real simple. It's just because we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
And I think that the inertia and the conventional wisdom has aligned with, to back up why we do it this way, and there's not enough people who are prepared to challenge that conventional wisdom and perhaps do things some other way, for whatever reason, right? Sellers are afraid that they might discover something they would have to disclose. I mean, why did they change from the multi-board 6.1, where you were supposed to provide the inspection report or the pages pertinent to what you're requesting? They changed that to the 7.0. Where you are not to provide, and that's something that differs from the 7.0 to the Chicago Association of Realtors form. And it's funny, I've had to actually change my practice with the CAR form, because the CAR form says provide the inspection, and I've had instances where I provide the inspection as the contract says to do, and you get someone that gets very upset on the other side. You're not supposed to do that. I'm like,
too bad.
Listen, you
chose.
You used the CAR form, man.
It was your choice.
Right.
So now, instead of ruffling feathers on the other side, because there's no reason to do that unnecessarily, I go, look, CAR form. Y'all have used the CAR form. Paragraph 16 or whichever of the CAR forms they're using. It says I'm supposed to provide the inspection. As a courtesy, I'm going to hold back on that unless you request it. Now they are coming out with an 8.0.
They being NAR or.
No, NAR doesn't
Chicago
do that.
Association of
NAR
Realtors.
Or CAR.
No,
Sorry.
not CAR. It's a group of attorneys, lenders, agents. I don't know what their conglomeration is called, but it's called the multi-board because there's more than one board. But they all get together and they have a little powwow and release some smoke and the whole thing. It's like
I would love to be in those meetings.
It's like a conclave.
No one ever asked me to go. I don't know anything about it.
IRELA, I don't know if you remember.
Illinois Real Estate Lawyers Association.
They have and it's on Wednesdays, so I always miss it. But I believe, I don't think it's today, but there's an upcoming webinar previewing the 8.0. So I'm real curious. I won't be able to attend live, but they archive that on their website. So
yeah, I have had the pleasure of being on their website.
Yeah, I will be curious to see. I would love to have them just put the appraisal contingency in, for crying out loud.
Right.
It's something a little bit more. I mean, you want to have our own conclave? We can come up with the 8.1.
I would
and
love
then
to.
It will be even better because it'll have a higher number.
We've worked with the Illinois Real Estate Attorneys and then also the Illinois Association of Realtors, and it's nice getting the state associations. And I am the president of the Home Inspectors Association in Illinois, so I'm heavily involved with lobbying efforts with the IDFPRs.
You guys didn't tell me that earlier.
You know what? You should be bowing. In front. Okay, we're
Charlie.
done. That's
right.
it. I know it's over, but
Let the
that's
record
it.
reflect I did bow.
My head just got about 8 feet wide because
Yeah.
somebody said I was royalty, but really I'm the jester of the court. Okay, and that's about it. But nonetheless, the point I'm trying to make is they do have lobbyists, and it's nice that we're all communicating with each other so we could have a united front.
Sort of.
It really does. I mean, the whole idea behind licensing in the great state of Illinois is all about protecting the public, and I really believe in that. All right. Now,
It's not about gatekeeping, Charlie.
It really isn't. We were talking about earlier, and how do we improve the profession? Is it some sort of a apprentice program? And I brought that up. I actually wanted that apprentice program in the home inspection field. But here's the bottom line,
Who's paying for it?
Right.
Well,
it's
yeah,
not required.
who's paying for it, but who's going to do it? All right. Most of our population in the home inspection business might do 1-2 inspection a week, and I'm talking 97% of them. There's very few people that treat this as a job or career and are full time at doing this.
So it's going to cost someone money to, implement that in their business, right?
There's not enough people to do it.
And number two, who's going to be in the enforcement mechanism?
Exactly.
Right.
And
Well,
then
it falls
what
upon
sort of
individual brokerages.
and what sort of responsibility do I have to take trying to teach someone else to be my competitor?
Right. But that's ultimately a lot of what stops progress.
That's every business. Like whoever would hire an employee if they thought, well, this person someday is going to compete with me. No new lawyer would ever get another job because we're all competing with our bosses at some point.
I guess.
But that's inherently the problem with the real estate brokerage industry, is that they're not going to promote you. They're not going to teach you to be better than them.
Oh, you figured it out yourself.
Right.
Yeah,
You-
but
that's real
failure.
estate in a
Right.
nutshell. If you don't
Why-
figure it out yourself,
Yeah, there's
you
no
know,
mentorship in real
see ya.
estate.
See, whereas I want to be just the opposite. In our business, we have right now we're at 12. We have 12 inspectors out in the field. I want these guys knowing as much as they can. All right.
Right, but
and I
isn't it
wanna be
also
there.
isn't it also because you don't want one of your inspectors to make a mistake that can bring the business into disrepute and remove it from a position of trust?
And I guess the attitude that I take is it's not about me.
Yeah.
I don't mind people making mistakes.
Sure.
I really don't care.
It's natural.
I don't care if my inspectors didn't know something and they failed to do their job, believe it or not.
I mean, I care about that.
Hear me out. All right. Here, let me finish a little bit. What I do care about is what we do about it.
Right.
All right. If they make a mistake or they leave something out and I say it's not my problem, now I'm a bad person. Now it's me who's bringing that reputation down, nobody else. All right.
Right, but what's missing in this circle of all the people involved is that the buyer never takes responsibility for making a mistake. It's always one of the real estate professionals that must be responsible
This is why
if
the
something
boomers,
goes wrong.
This is why the boomers were the greatest generation of all time.
Right.
What are
We
you
will be
talking about?
accountable. Boomers, unite. All right? We must go to war with the rest of these generations. We are
Let the
still
buyer beware
in power.
is really a forgotten principle. But
I just-
ultimately, that's what, whether you're a broker, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're an inspector, your goal is to do your best for your client.
Absolutely.
I almost pulled a Steve Davis on you there because I was ready to combine an animal with a thing that comes out of an animal. And because, you proclaiming boomers as the greatest generation is a blasphemy.
I don't know about that. See, even Devin gave me a thumbs up.
No,
Devin
Devin's-
believes that we're the greatest generation of all time.
I do see a thumbs up.
Nonsense. Look, and buyer beware is a thing, okay? And
And it needs to be more of a thing, but it is what it is, and we deal with it as we get it.
On the rare occasions, fortunately, that I get, that someone reaches out to me, from a buyer side, where I represented a seller, it's at some point, in the recent past, and something's happened. They're like, well, we got water in the basement. We think your guy knew about it. It's like, look,
So what?
I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah.
The fact that your contractor said that to you is mainly, is almost certainly them wanting to tell you what you want to hear.
Right.
Well, them trying to provoke an emotion to
well,
get a reaction.
They,
and to
they're
get
telling-
business to do the repair.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's
'cause
what I mean.
I've been through that too many times, and I go, look, unfortunately, this is one of those situations where your client had bad luck, and this is a caveat emptor, scenario, and it probably sounds kind of cold because it's like I'm not really thinking about the other person's feelings, but that's where your feelings
Don't matter.
That's for you to deal with.
Right. Your feelings are yours. You should feel them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel the feelings you need to feel, but at the end of the day, that's one where I've got to protect my client, and I've got to be very clear about what the law is and what the law is not.
But also, the broker is usually the first one to field that phone call. Like the buyer who lives in a house, it floods a couple weeks after closing or even within a year. The broker fields that first call, and then the broker doesn't know how to handle that, and certainly. Or
Call
mostly,
your lawyer.
Yeah, right. They're going to say call the attorney.
Call the home
if
inspector,
I'm
yeah.
wearing the different hat and I'm the attorney on the transaction, the only thing I can do is go back to the inspection information and the information I had available that's contained in the file. I wouldn't be able to recreate time to figure out what did everybody see at that time other than looking at the inspection.
Yeah, the approach I typically take when someone comes to me with something like that is I go, look, it really sucks that happened. Now, we don't know, and I'll tell them, the thing about, that whatever that contractor told you, unlikely that they will repeat that same very definitive statement if they were under oath. Okay, so I
Or
understand
in
that-
writing, or on their
Right.
letterhead.
or at all.
Yeah.
Or, because I've had those phone calls where I'm like, yeah, you told so-and-so, X, Y, and Z. And they go, wow, that's not exactly what I said. Every time. I said, look, whatever the problem is, that's happening right now, take the necessary steps to fix the problem.
Boom.
If
Right. Number one, the problem has to be solved.
if your furnace ain't working, there's nothing I'm going to get from the seller that is going to make it work in time for you not to freeze to death in your home. So fix the problem. Document it. Okay, you've got you've got basically a movie studio in your pocket. Take notes, take pictures, take videos, all of it. Make sure if you have a conversation with someone, document that conversation.
And I'm going to jump in there.
Keep the invoices.
You got to get them to reach out to me too. All right. And here's a problem, because I shared this story with you a few different times, and it's happened multiple times. You're going to get unscrupulous contractors that are going to tell you that this furnace is bad and the whole thing needs to be replaced, and it doesn't.
Right. I had that come up a week ago. Property closed, and the furnace was working at the time of the inspection and the time of the closing, because the lender required a pre-closing specific inspection of the furnace to make sure that it worked. And then 2 weeks later, my buyer was asking me, I'm being told I have to replace the whole system. What can I do? I was like, you need to call the inspector. I said, something seems to be, there's a disconnect.
Fishy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I had same thing. I had somebody trying to sell one of my clients 3 water heaters for $16,000. I had another one selling a water heater and a garage door opener at the same time for $7,500. Both of them were, both of those situations were in perfect working order, and we're getting towards the end of our hour right here. So this is where I try to figure out one good question that I asked Patrick that he has to have 8 hours to answer, but I only give him 30 seconds. So I'm not going to do that to you. I love you too much.
Shut up.
That
Feeling
works
some
out very
tension
well.
between these two.
No. I respect him quite a bit. I mean, the
He knows
wealth
what he's
of-
doing for sure.
He definitely does, and the fact that he's empathetic and he cares about other people means a lot to me. And he really goes out of his way to help
I'm
people.
trying to get rid of that. It's
Don't.
really
It's
not,
a good
He doesn't
quality.
like that moniker. I like it.
It's not
Me
useful
too.
in law. You really just have to be a rat. I don't know if I can say that word.
You cannot.
You have to be a rat think.
Give
A rat
us
fink.
your final words, and how do people get hold of you, Patrick, please?
Final words. Find me on social media, Loftus_law on Instagram, at Loftus Law on the soon to be a thing that we tell our kids about, or grandkids about, called TikTok.
It's gonna go. Alisa, please give us your contact information, and then one last piece of advice you can give.
All right. Well, contact me at levinlawltd.com or urbanhomeschicago.com. Available for legal services, evictions, real estate closings, or real estate brokerage. And my phone number is 312-841-7699. Piece of advice, I think the best thing that a buyer can do is educate themselves on the product. They can learn a lot about real estate by trying to actually learn about what they're interested in and what they need.
And that's one of the things we're going to start building is an education platform, and keep it simple, all right? And the whole idea is, what do I need to know as a buyer or seller to get through this process so that I'm not caught off guard?
Right.
All right?
Sellers
We'll
don't
work on that.
Sellers, don't be afraid to disclose something, okay?
Please.
It will save you time, money, and headaches.
Oh, my God,
And,
yes.
and just trust the people that you have hired, your broker, your attorney, and we'll get you through it. I promise.
But
Right.
check their background too. Don't just trust blindly. Make sure that's a person that you want to be working with because they're in charge of your life. My name is Charlie Bellefontaine. I own Chicagoland Home Inspectors. Our phone number is 312-544-9180. I'd like to give special thank yous to Devin Tingle. He's the person who makes all this stuff work. And you listen to WC